Hey everyone, welcome to episode 2 of Do I Belong in Crotus Prenn. Today we're discussing the highly memed theory of Nea being the entity. I want to tell you today that this theory is far more true than you could have ever imagined. Nea is typically referred to as the entity due to her soulless eyes, drab fashion sense, and often high levels of toxicity. It's been further theorized that the developers have possibly tried to hide Nea's true identity by providing her with glasses in Nea Cosmetics, but anyone who is capable of seeing beyond the surface can tell that there is something else going on behind those eyes. I want to now skirt through some different pieces of evidence and further analyze Nea's lore. Some Nea Cosmetics to take note of right away is the not so subtle hint from the developers of the tank top named Crew 2017, a tank top only available to developers of the artifact rarity and depicting, well, none other than the entity. That could be a near case closed, huh? The only character with a cosmetic that directly depicts the entity, and it just so happens to be Nea. Not convinced? Sure, I understand. Next we have the two cosmetics. First, the top named Svartkat, which is Swedish for black cat. Now this shirt depicts what we can see in game also as the Spine Chill cat. Spine Chill is a base game perk tied to no one, meaning it would be entirely a creation of the entity. Supposedly, right? It seems a little odd that the entity, Nea, would have a shirt depicting something tied to the entity's realm prior to going there. What we're seeing in this cosmetic is the entity basically wearing its own merch. Next, if we look at the top called Rat Print Top, which is an event top from a New Year event, the cosmetic reads, "The design resonated with Nea, a reminder of her charming pet rat Milo." Pet rat, huh? Who else likes to keep pet rats? That's right, the entity. On Hawkins, we can see them scuttling around everywhere. They all look the same too. So maybe the entity has mass cloned Milo and made him prevalent within the trials. On a different note, and a cosmetic we've discussed before, is the Rift cosmetic named Truth to Power. Possibly a hint to the truth we're uncovering about the true powers at work here. This shirt contains musical notes, which when played will sound like this. That's right, they play the opening notes of the Dead by Daylight theme, another of the entity's creations within its trials that we as the player can hear. Further on the Jelly Bomb top, the flavor text reads, "Watch out for the tentacles, they sting." Tentacles, huh? I wonder where else I've seen tentacles in Dead by Daylight. Let's look at Nea's perks now, because I think they're quite interesting indeed. If we look at Nea's perks, something you'll notice is that in many ways they will break the way she interacts with trials, bending their rules slightly and also giving her abilities the killers typically only have. First, Urban Evasion. Right off you'll notice the image is quite suspicious, with these strange trails following Nea. These to me look extremely similar to the entity's claws in game, ones that we can see within other things like the Obsession imagery and further in the aforementioned Crew 2017 top. This trail also seems to be coming directly out of Nea. Little suspicious if you ask me. We then have Balanced Landing, a perk that lets you reduce the stagger from falling from a good height, an ability typically reserved only to killers. Yet Nea is given access to this killer-only ability with her perk. Strange. We then have her perk Streetwise. The most interesting part of this is what the perk depicts. It depicts the word mash sticks, which is Nea's graffiti tag. This is potentially an excerpt of the entity's language. Compare it to another instance of the entity's language, and I mean, look at them. Don't these look extremely similar and to be from the same language? Okay, let's look at the lore now. First, we know that Nea is female, and further that the entity is also referred to as a female, or in a feminine way. Further, Nea's role is described as urban artist. Could this be the entity considering its own realm art? In the lore, Nea tags buildings, but she never really does art. It's never specifically described what art she creates, she just tags. Tagging is effectively just writing your name on something, it's not really art. So could Nea be the embodiment of the entity admiring its own magnum opus from within? From an excerpt about Nea, likely from Benedict Baker, we can read, "At first sight I thought it was a cat that passed me by, just a few meters behind me. A shadow that moved without sound. But yelling is not wise in this place. I've spotted her more times, but just in the peripheral. I still don't know her name, but she evades the monsters with a certain grace. She's like a shadow, Only appears in the peripheral. Don't know her name. Evades the monsters. Maybe it's because she controls them. If we look into her core lore, which reads, Nea is of a Swedish descent, a tagger and a bit of a troublemaker. She started rebelling when she was 16. She dyed her hair black and cut it in a way she liked. In her early teens, her parents thought she lacked that thing that makes everyone else normal. I bet they did. Could this have been the fact that she wasn't human but actually a spider god? Nea grew up in the small town of Hjo in Sweden. She had a happy childhood even though her mum and dad worked hard. As the opportunity to move to the US became a reality, she started acting out. Her parents didn't really pick up on this as a reaction to their move. Nea was forced to leave her friends and life behind. Nea shied away from what her parents considered normal. Again, another mention of normal. Nea clearly isn't human, or at the very least doesn't seem to be normal even to her parents. Instead, she took refuge in skate parks. The trials were a bit like a park, a sadistic one at that, and her tag Mash Sticks, again this looks a lot like the entity's language, was seen more or less all over her new hometown, and Nea made a sport out of, she's noted here to make a sport out of something typically considered wrong, a bit like the entity creating a game or sport out of its trials and the survivors and killers inside. Finally, Nea's parents became used to Nea disappearing for a few days on end. Isn't that strange? It's all too similar to how the entity takes people and they disappear entirely. As she's nimble and almost cat-like, she's able to evade deadly dangers. Finally, she's referred to as a cat again. Something that runs as a theme is comparing her to animals. Very strange, very interesting. Next, let's look at her tome lore. Tome 5 Unleashed, Rebel with a Cause. Let's read through it and I'll point out some interesting details and things to mention. In Memory 684, Nea and her friend Casey are handing out water. In this section we can see something quite interesting. Nea watches Casey and the other woman handing water out to the poor. How many kids at home? 3. Okay, here's a dozen bottles. 4. Okay, take an extra container. Interestingly, we can note that first they are offered a dozen bottles, a dozen being 12, and when they correct their answer to 4, they are told to take an extra container. If we take 4, then 12 for a dozen, and add 1, as in an extra container, we get the number 413. 413 equates to a HTTP error code which reads, Entity is larger than limits defined by server. Could this be a hint at the fact that Nea's physical body is not large enough to hold the extensive and ridiculously large entity? Further, in Memory 684, we can't save the world, Casey. What's a few containers of bottled water gonna do? Casey freezes and gives Nea a look she doesn't quite understand. Of course, Nea does not understand human emotions because she's actually an oversized spider. She also doesn't understand the importance of water. She's never really had to think about something as basic and essential as water because she's a spider god. In Memory 692, we find out that Nea hates people that she names kings, which are effectively rich people who exploit the poor. This is interesting because many of our survivors and also killers in game are the children of rich parents. In conclusion, Nea is the entity, or at least a branch of the entity's consciousness, a bit like the crows and rats within the trials. Nea is a spectator from within, admiring its own creation, wearing its own clothing, and subtly breaking its own rules as it does. Well, I think that's gonna do it. I do hope you enjoyed. Thanks, and goodbye. An additional thank you to LHPL3, as well as my other members for supporting the channel.